What's good? Salutations to the nations. Angel Knots, it's your boy Young Sinai.
Angel Knot.
All right, here we go. Well, before we get started, we're going to go ahead and get things started with a prayer. All right. Father God, thank you for today. Thank you for anybody that tunes in, Lord. Just ask that you bless them and their families, watch over them, protect them, let them come to know you. If they don't, if they do, let them get even closer to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Angel Knot.
All right, so I used to love Goosebumps as a kid, as well as Animorphs. But I want to see this video regarding. Actually, we're going to do this one first. Hold on. I got two Goosebumps videos, okay? We're going to first do the history of Goosebump books, so we can know how it all came into existence with R.L. Stine. All right, so this video is brought to us by Secret Galaxy. Shout outs to them. All right, let's go ahead.
Monsters, werewolves, snakes, skeletons, weird noises, slime, haunted dolls, zombies, spirits of the undead, creatures that creep in the night. It was everything a kid's nightmares are made of, delivered in the most terrifying way they could imagine. Books. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Goosebumps. Goosebumps is a
Slappy. I was just about to talk about Slappy. That's like the most iconic Goosebump character. He like Chucky, but a ventriloquist dummy.
Media franchise that began with a series of 62 books written by R.L. Stine, published between 1992 and 1997. For many kids, it was their first exposure to the genre of horror, and for many more, their first exposure to reading for fun. Robert Lawrence Stine, or R.L. Stine, is...
Could you imagine your first time you say, you know, I wanna start reading, and then you pick up a book and you're like, now you have nightmares and you never read again.
He is more popularly known, was born in Columbus, Ohio in 1943. He began his journey into writing just 9 years later when he first put his hands on a typewriter. He wrote his own stories and made his own comic books. Despite his mother begging him to go outside and play, he insisted that outside was too boring.
Whammy.
Making his own joke books was way more fun. Stine was a self-described comic book freak who loved things like science fiction and EC Comics horror titles like Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror.
Did y'all used to watch the Tales from the Crypt TV show back in the day?
Comics that were scary, shocking, funny, and marketed to kids. In fact, in 1954, the US government targeted EC Comics as what they perceived to be one of the major corrupting forces of America's youth. The pressure was so intense that EC Comics stopped publishing horror comics, and the comics industry created the Comics Code Authority to self-censor and prevent any publisher from doing what EC Comics did. We'll come back to this. Even more than comics, Stine credited his interest in reading and writing to a librarian who knew he was into comics and shifted his attention to the works of Ray Bradbury. In a 2020 interview with Time, he praised what really drew him to Bradbury's work was that they were imaginative and so well written, and all had great twist endings. Thank you to KiwiCo for Kiwi through apps, Fraction Education for all. First month of a secret
university.
In 1965, Stine pursued his dream of becoming a professional writer. As he said in a 1996 interview, he moved to New York, started writing humor books, coloring books, and even bubblegum cards. Because, quote, somebody's got to write that stuff. When you start out as a freelancer, you don't say no to anybody. Stine landed a job with Scholastic, a US-based publishing company, where he wrote dozens of...
Well, it's kind of facts. You still got to have your morals, you know. But I don't think that bubblegum was, you know, impeding upon his morals too much.
Books, and founded the magazine Bananas under the pen name Jovial Bob Stine. 72 issues of Bananas were published by Scholastic from 1975 through 1984.
Did y'all used to watch Three's Company?
2 years after that, in
I used to watch it on Nick at Night. Y'all remember that?
1986, Stine wrote his first horror novel called Blind Date, which was a surprise because he had never considered writing horror until a publisher at Scholastic insisted he could write a good horror novel for teenagers. From that same interview with Time in 2020, quote, I didn't know what she was talking about. What is a horror novel for teenagers? So I had to run to the bookstore and buy up a whole bunch of books by Lois Duncan and Christopher Pike and see. Then I wrote this book, Blind Date. It was a #1 bestseller. I thought, wait a minute, forget the funny stuff. Kids like to be scared. I've been scary ever since. Blind Date was the first of a new Scholastic young...
That boy is there. As soon as he, hold up. My bad. I was trying to get a sound effect, but it's taking too long.
adult series called Point Horror. Stein continued to write teen horror novels with titles like The Snowman, Beach Party, The Boyfriend, The Babysitter, and The Babysitter 2. In 1989, Stein wrote The New Girl to kick off a new series of teen horror novels called Fear Street. Some of the books were horror, some of them mystery. All of them took Stein back to the bestseller list and reinforced his reputation as a horror writer for young adults. As a side hustle, he put his jovial Bob Stein hat back on to co-create the TV series Eureka's Castle for Nickelodeon. He was the head writer and helped create the characters, which would end up running 3 seasons through 1991. Stein's wife, Jane, was the co-founder of
To think that R.L. Stein wrote for Nick Jr. That's funny.
Parachute Press with Joan Warshaw in 1983. That's the company that produced the books that Stein wrote and then sold to Scholastic. After the success of his teen horror novels, Jane and Joan
R.L. Stein is like the kid version of Stephen King. I wonder if R.L. Stein and Stephen King have a friendship.
convinced him to target an even younger audience. As Stein put it in that same Time interview, quote, "No one had ever done a scary series for ages 7 to 11 before, and I wasn't sure it would work. I said, all right, if I can think of a good name, maybe we'll do 2 or 3. Legend has it that fate intervened when Stein saw a print ad that said, "It's Goosebumps week on Channel 11," and lo, the path was revealed to him. Goosebumps began as a 6-book contract with Scholastic. The first book, Welcome to Dead House, was published in July of 1992. It didn't take long for Stein to find his voice for the Goosebumps series. He has admitted that Welcome to Dead House was a bit scarier than it should have been, but by the second book, Stay Out of the Basement, he worked out the magic formula of light horror mixed with humor.
I wonder who did the artwork. Well, I mean, I guess could know just by looking at a book and see, who was the illustrator. But the artwork for the covers for Goosebumps, man, that stuff was epic.
Stein wanted to craft stories that were what he called safe scares, like a white-knuckle ride on a roller coaster with dips and curves that always lands without mishap. As he put it in a 1996 LA Times article, quote, "You know how it is going to end before you get on." Stein was a machine of Goosebumps production, writing a book a week, frequently starting with the ending and working back from there. New characters, new settings, new mysteries, and supernatural happenings. Always being careful to stick to self-imposed guidelines about what scary meant in a Goosebumps book. To Stein, that meant keeping one foot in the supernatural. Where his teen horror novels depended on believability, the younger audience of Goosebumps needed fantasy, things that couldn't actually happen. As he saw it, kids that age already had enough scary things to deal with, like drugs, their parents getting divorced.
Yo, that's dope. I like that, man. I like that. That really shows concern for the children, to not get them freaked out so much. I think a lot of times when people think about horror, all they think about is what can shock somebody so much and just give them nightmares. And I think that it's cool that he wanted to, like you said, have one foot in, one foot out.
Divorced, farting too much, probably. While ghosts are fun to imagine, no one ever actually dies in a Goosebumps book, because that's the line that shouldn't be crossed.
Yeah.
Step right up, ladies and gentlemen. Next Saturday morning for Slappy Sideshow Saturday. Only on Fox Kids. I'm Slappy. Even more tales than you can possibly imagine. Just think, you'll see all the freakiest Fox Kids creatures.
Tell me when it's off.
So remember, be here next Saturday morning for Slappy Sideshow Saturday on the only place that rocks kids, Fox Kids. You know, you really should try to get some sun.
Stein pulled ideas from any place he could.
That mask one, that was a good one too.
He could get them, the comics and books he read as a child, movies, stories that he was told, stories that he misunderstood, anything he could think of that might have an angle that could make it scary. Goosebumps took off. Within 2 years, Scholastic had sold roughly 200,000 copies of every title in the Goosebumps series. That was double the volume of the Fear Street books in that same time. The secret, a surprise to both Parachute Press and Scholastic, was that Goosebumps managed to appeal to both girls and boys. Goosebumps not only found the younger audience it was reaching for, but landed across demographics as indicated by the mountain of fan mail they received on a regular basis. On the other hand, adults weren't entirely on board with the new phenomenon. While most were happy that kids were reading by choice, some weren't happy with the choices they were making. Goosebumps were exposing them to violence, they said, as some communities attempted to have the books banned from libraries.
Violence?
Goosebumps are the junk food of children's books, they cried. Goosebumps...
I mean, yeah. I mean, it probably is, but I mean, it's fiction, What fiction isn't junk food?
Are the literary equivalent of comic books and should be treated as such, inappropriate for school reading. This echoed the sentiment of the very comic books that Stein himself grew up reading: EC's horror, crime, and mystery comics, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror. Cries of censorship once again rang out in the name of protecting children, like a terrible creature rising up from the grave to haunt him in the future, the reanimated husk of the darkest days of the comics industry. Some parents and educators thought that the content and reading level of Goosebumps books was so poor that, to them, reading Goosebumps was worse than not reading at all. Thankfully, many others defended Goosebumps as a gateway to more complex literature built on a foundation of excitement for the medium. They argued that it was the parents' responsibility to determine what was appropriate for their children, not the government. In 1995, Scholastic expanded the Goosebumps empire with Give Yourself Goosebumps, a series of game books similar to Choose Your Own Adventure, books with multiple alternate endings that varied depending.
Man, these books are so epic, man. And then like these ones with the holographic covers, man, this made me want to get on eBay and look for some.
On the choices made by the reader and allowed for multiple reads of the same book written by multiple ghostwriters, taking on the responsibility of the brand and the name R.L. Stein. That same year, as an indicator of its burgeoning...
Oh, so those books weren't written by R.L. Stein? When it was saying ghostwriters, I thought it was trying to be funny because, you know, it's Goosebumps, but those were written by other authors. Okay.
Culture status, Goosebumps was adapted for television. Fox Kids CEO Margaret Lesh, who had been responsible for some of the most popular kids television programs.
Hey, that was a good show too. I ain't gonna lie.
In history, recognized the potential of Goosebumps after her own son started reading the books. Some network executives weren't sure that an anthology series was going to work, but it turned out their fears were unfounded as Goosebumps became the #1 rated kids television show in the US for the next 3 years.
Wow.
Most of the episodes were adapted directly from the books. As of this video, many of the episodes are available to purchase officially through various streaming services or unofficially here on YouTube. Goosebumps was a licensing powerhouse with the brand name and various characters featured on a variety of merchandise: school supplies, clothing, puzzles. Hasbro produced a monster head maker, Milton Bradley board games like One Day at Horrorland and Terror in the Graveyard. There were handheld electronic video games, collectible figures, and if you can believe it, Pogs. Goosebumps fortunes peaked in 1990.
Yo, I got Pogs. I got a Pog collection. I'm gonna have to share it with y'all one day.
With 5 million books sold, nearly 130 million since the series began in 1992, likely accounting for around $450 million in sales for Scholastic. And that's when the fervor for the books began to subside, perhaps an indicator of young readers growing out of the series, perhaps moving on to Scholastic's new series, Animorphs.
Yeah, see, that's what I was talking about earlier. You know what I mean? It was Goosebumps and Animorphs. And Animorphs, remember? You could take the Animorph book, and at the bottom, you could flip the pages, and it would show like the kid transforming into the animal. Man, that was hard.
Contribution to Scholastic's revenue dropped precipitously in 1997, as did their stock price, roughly 40%. The reality was that behind the scenes, Scholastic and Parachute were battling for control of the franchise rights and the percentage of hundreds of millions of dollars of profits. See, in 1996, when Scholastic and Parachute signed a new contract, Parachute demanded a greater share of profits and control of merchandising. Scholastic refused. Scholastic had long since stopped being just a publisher. They were essentially a licensing and multimedia company thanks to lessons learned during the success of The Magic School Bus in the mid-90s. Parachute knew a Goosebumps feature film was already being discussed between Scholastic and Fox, and that merchandising was where all the real money was going to be made. Parachute was getting around 33% of merchandise sales and around 7% of book sales. They wanted more, and they had leverage in the form of final say on whether or not a deal goes through. When Scholastic refused to negotiate their percentages, Parachute started declining deals. Down went the movie at Fox, as well as the $30 million promotional tie-in with Pepsi. By the time the two sides came to an agreement, sales were already in the toilet and the damage to the brand was done. In 1990,
Yo, they was really treating Slappy like Chucky. I did not know there was a bride of Slappy.
the original run of Goosebumps books and the television series came to an end as Stein began writing a new series called Goosebumps 2000, which purported to be much scarier than the original books in an attempt to recapture some of those lapsed readers. The legal action dragged into the new millennium and prevented Stein's contract from being renewed in 2000. Publication of all Goosebumps books ceased, It would be 3 more years until the two sides could come to a resolution. In 2003, Scholastic purchased the Goosebumps franchise in its entirety from Parachute for $9.65 million. It was the best solution because, as Jane
I did not know that Scholastic also published Harry Potter. Man, they was getting cheese.
Stein said in a 2003 article in Publishers Weekly, quote, "We have always been committed to do what is best for the property," and that she was happy with the way things turned out and excited about the future. R.L. Stein returned to writing Goosebumps books in 2008 with the Goosebumps Horrorland series published by Scholastic. For the
that cover ain't hitting like them Goosebumps. I ain't gonna lie. I ain't gonna hold you.
first time ever, each book was part of a continuing story that developed a consistent world and featured recurring characters and the vilest villains from the original Goosebumps series. 19 books were published through January of 2011, at which time the Hall of Horrors series replaced it with 6 more books through April of 2012. The new series was supported by the interactive websites EnterHorrorland.com and EscapeHorrorland.com. The game Goosebumps Horrorland was also released for the Nintendo DS, Wii, and PS2. In 2015, Goosebumps finally made it to theaters with Goosebumps starring Jack Black as R.L. Stein, sort of. This R.L. Stein is a writer, but there's also a lot of actual magic involved that binds the creatures in his stories to the pages of the books he writes. The likeness ends at human with glasses. Goosebumps was a box office
I've never seen that before. Is it good?
success, and the sequel, Goosebumps 2 Haunted Halloween, arrived 3 years later in 2018. Jack Black was back, and while it didn't perform as well as the first movie, it was still a commercial success, capitalizing on the 90s kids who grew up with the books, now old enough to bring their own kids to share in the experience. Goosebumps was back on television in 2023, or at least streaming. Like previous adaptations, it featured many of the familiar monsters and ghouls from the books, but with a serialized story instead of starting fresh each episode. 10 episodes were available on Disney Plus and Hulu. Response was strong enough from critics and fans that a second season was greenlit in February of 2024. As of this video, no premiere date for season 2 has been announced, but we do know that it will feature an all-new cast, a new setting, and a new mystery.
Hey, that look
and that is
hard.
a perfect way to define the future of the franchise. Billions in sales, the second best-selling book series of all time behind only Harry Potter. As a 90s brand in an era of 90s resurgence with all the ownership rights in one place, the ceiling for production is as high as the audience wants it to go. Technology ruins every mystery, Stein said to Time magazine in 2020. He was referring to the challenge of creating a compelling story. As a writer, he has to find a way to get the phones out of the characters' hands. They lose them or run out of power, or there's no signal. But that's also a good approach for the
Wait, what? Hold on, what?
creating a compelling story. As a writer, he has to find a way to get the phones out of the characters' hands. They lose them or run out of power, or there's no signal. But that's also a
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I said. I think what he's saying is like, a lot of problems can be solved with a phone. I always say that about Seinfeld. Like Seinfeld, that's one of my favorite shows of all time, but so many things that they face could have been simply solved if they had cell phones.
a good approach for the real world. Stein believes that once you take out the technology, kids are no different today than he was 70 years ago reading horror comics, because fears never change, and we all get goosebumps. Thanks for watching. Please hit like, hit subscribe if you're not already a subscriber.
Yeah, so that was dope. Did you used to read Goosebumps as a kid? Let me know in the comments. Or were you more of an Animorph person? If you was, I ain't mad at you. You feel me? I like Goosebump books. So I'm a Christian. I don't deal with a lot of the satanic stuff. But Goosebumps, I don't think it dives heavy into that. I think it's more just about like fantasy horror, which I can get with. All right, but yo. So I had another Goosebump video lined up. I think I'm going to save it for another time because I don't want to watch more Goosebump stuff at the moment. I'm all goosebumped out.
Welcome to now.
All right, y'all. So I'm going to go ahead and end this. Salutations to the nations. Peace.
Angel Knot.